Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Lamed Gimel, a very interesting daf, I should say. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Art Gould in loving memory of his beloved bride and best friend of 50 years, Carol J. Robinson, Karina Gola Bat Huda V'Yehuda Tzvi, on the occasion of her first year at site. You will be in my heart forever. Okay, we are now going to get started from the end of Lamed Bet Amud Bet, and we're going to finish the second chapter and start the third. So we have, and with that, we're going to actually close this whole issue of lost items. So we're in the topic, we got off topic a little bit because we got into prika and tina, taking off heavy loads on animals and also helping someone to load up something on an animal or even on themselves. Then we said, and remember, if we keep making this distinction, prika has to do with tza'ar ba'alei chayim, that animals are suffering, or perhaps, we don't know, is the focus on trying to help your friend who's struggling because the animal's going to fall under this load, or is it really for the animal? And that's the whole question. Can we learn from this halacha that tza'ar ba'alei chayim is by Torah law? Now, tina, which is helping to load up an animal, has absolutely nothing to do with tza'ar ba'alei chayim. So every time we have a source that we try to use as a proof, if we can say, oh, but that has to do about tina, it doesn't have to do about prika, then we remove the whole issue of tza'ar ba'alei chayim and it's not on the table anymore. So that was part of the way they resolved some of those sources and said, oh, it's just not talking about prika, it's talking about tina, in which case it's irrelevant. So let's go to the sixth source on our page. It's at the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom of Lamed Bet Amud Bet. Tashma, sonei she'amru, sonei Israel, velo sonei ovei kochavim. So now they assume right now that this Breita is referring to the word sonei in the verse. Remember the verse? So if you don't, I'll read it to you. Ki tir'eh chamor sonecha, and we're going to darshan this, a lot of words on this pasuk in another minute also. If you see the chamor of your enemy, rovetz tachat masa'o, struggling under its burden, v'chadalta me'azov lo, and you don't stop to help him, azov tazov imo, you have to help him basically. So now they say the sonei talking about in this pasuk is a Jewish sonei, not a Gentile sonei, meaning you don't have to help a Gentile's animal if it's struggling under its burden. Well, that obviously indicates that the issue is between the two people here and not the person and the animal, because if it was all about tza'ar ba'alei chayim, then you would have to help the animal, even if it wasn't belonging to a Jew. I want to just remind you, this whole thing of tza'ar ba'alei chayim, it doesn't mean it's not an issue. It just means by Torah law, it's not an issue. Still, the rabbis instituted tza'ar ba'alei chayim. By the way, one of the main ramifications of tza'ar ba'alei chayim, there's all sorts of ramifications in our day, but one of them is, I remember learning this in high school, can you go to bullfights? Because bullfights, it's tza'ar ba'alei chayim. Perhaps even just going to a bullfight and supporting that kind of thing is really, tza'ar ba'alei chayim. You're not allowed to do that, halachically. Forget about other reasons why but from a halachic perspective, there could be an issue there. So anyway, so that's how I remember coming across tza'ar ba'alei chayim for the first time and learning about that. So, tza'ar ba'alei chayim de'oraita. It's interesting to think the things that we learned in high school and what we remember years later. Now, it should be equally applicable to Jews and Gentiles animals. If we care about animals, it doesn't matter whether it's owned by a Jew or owned by a Gentile. So that must prove that tza'ar ba'alei chayim is rabbinic. However, the Gemara is going to reject this and say, oh, you misunderstood what they were referring to. They weren't referring to the sonei and the pasuk, or not necessarily. These are different ways you can understand it. Maybe it was referring to the source we ended with yesterday. Always at the end of the daf, it's the end of the daf. Maybe you don't remember, so let's recall what we learned. The source before this was, Ohev lifrok v'sonei liton. You have 2 things in front of you. We're going to get to other discussions of this today when you have to choose. You have your friend's animal, which needs help with prika. So you have 2 things. Number 1, it's your friend. Number 2, the animal is struggling. On the other hand, you have your enemy, and your enemy needs help putting on a load. Sonei liton. So what do you have to do first? Mitzvah b'sonei kedei l'chuvik yitzro. Your natural instinct would be to go help the person you love. And instead, the halacha tells you, you have to help the one you hate because we want you to get over it, right? And push yourself to do things that are not natural instincts. So first we tried to say, doesn't that prove tza'ar ba'alei chayim is in Torah law? And in the end, they said, no, it's just that this is more important. There's 2 things, and we have to choose one over the other. Tza'ar ba'alei chayim could be a Torah law. It's just that also l'chuvik yitzro is really important, and to help someone who's not your friend is a super important value. And maybe we'll get back to this when we're going to end our chapter about this idea of, achdut, of, a big topic talked about all the time nowadays of people being there for people who they don't necessarily agree with. So now we're going to say, when we say soneh, in that Braita said, if you have the friend who you love, who has an animal who's struggling under a burden, and on the other hand, you have someone you hate who needs help loading up an object, well, you only have to help that person you hate, right, to basically teach you a lesson. Well, that, and to go against your natural inclination when it's not a good natural inclination, that is only if the soneh is a Jew. But if the soneh is a Gentile, then you don't have to. But notice, what's the issue there? That's ti'ina, it's not prika. So it has nothing to do with tza'ar ba'alei chayim, and then this doesn't teach you anything about it. So that's the answer to this, or the rejection of you trying to use this source to prove tza'ar ba'alei chayim is only rabbinic. We can't prove it. Next source, tashma, and last source. Rovetz, now we're going to darshan, as I told you, all the words, or a bunch of words in that pasuk. Rovetz, right, the animal is struggling under its burden. Below ravtzan, it has to be that it kind of happened once, not that it happens all the time. If this animal can't handle burdens ever, you put something on its back and it starts crouching and can't handle it, you're actually exempt. Rovetz below omed has to be, what does rovetz mean? Crouched down. What if it's struggling with its burden but standing tall? You don't have to help the animal. Tachat masa'o v'lo meforak means, right, he's struggling under its burden, and not that the burden is off of the animal, meaning not ti'ina. You don't have to load. Now, this is going to be a problem because this sounds like you're exempt from loading, from helping to load, which is not true. There's a whole pasuk about that. So we'll get back to this and try to understand it. Tachat masa'o, this is some drasha we saw already in the name of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and remember that because we're going to get back to that. Masui shechol amobo. Remember, Rabbi Yossi Aglili in the Mishna said it has to be a burden that's a typical burden. If the owner put on a very, very heavy burden, you don't have to help. If you'd say tza'ar ba'alei chayim, the animal is suffering, well, then it shouldn't matter if every time this happens, the animal suffers. If the animal's suffering, you help the animal, right? The idea is that basically the owner is in the wrong for continually putting on burdens on this animal when the animal can't handle it, and therefore you don't need to help. But that sounds like it's between you and the owner of the animal and not having anything to do with the animal struggling. And mali omed. And what does it matter if the animal's standing? If the animal's struggling under its burden and might fall down, the fact that it's still standing tall doesn't mean it's not going to collapse soon. So sounds like tza'ar ba'alei chayim is only rabbinic, to which the Gemara says, and connect it with what I mentioned before, Hamani Rabbi Yossi Aglili ta'amar tza'ar ba'alei chayim d'Rabbanan. Maybe you could say that the author of this entire source is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who holds that tza'ar ba'alei chayim is rabbinic. To which they say, and in fact, we can further prove it, as you can imagine. We already said the rabbis disagree with that point. So this would be perfect to say it's all Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because that line about the masoi, this masa, right? Tachat masa'o, why did it say it's masa and not just the masa, right? Or a masa, a burden. It said it's burden, which means that it has to be a burden the animal can stand under, which means that if the owner puts on something too heavy, you don't need to worry about it. That's because Rabbi Yossi Aglili didn't think that tza'ar ba'alei chayim was d'oraita. But maybe the rabbis disagree on this point and think that tza'ar ba'alei chayim is d'oraita. And don't ask me a question for this Braita, because this whole Braita is authored by Rabbi Yossi Aglili. But, and they say, and there, I didn't bring the whole proof in the words of the Gemara, but now we'll see it. Man shama leidi lehai sfar. Who's the one who holds tachat masa'o is masui shechol amobo? Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Shma mina. So that sounds like a pretty good answer. The Gemara is going to raise a problem. Really? How can you say this whole Braita is Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Look at a different line in the Braita, which we know isn't Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Haktane seifa, tachat masa'o v'lo meforak. Now we have to understand that line we didn't understand. It said not meforak, meaning not if it's off the animal. My lo meforak, ilay ma lo meforak klal. If you want to say it's not on the animal at all, and the whole thing is you don't have to help put it back on, haktiv hakem tekimimo. But there's a mitzvah in the Torah to put it back on and help load the animal. So you can't possibly say that's what this is talking about. Ela pshita, obviously what they mean is lo meforak bechinam ela b'sachar. You don't have to help load for free. You have to do it, but you can get paid for doing it. And that must be what it means, which matches the sources we saw before. Now, how do we know this isn't Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Because there's a machloket about this, and this matches the Tanakama's opinion, right? Man shama leidi lehai svara Rabbanan. So basically, since the rabbis hold the ti'ina is b'sachar, if you remember, the rabbis argue with Rabbi Shimon there. The rabbis say ti'ina you have to pay, and Rabbi Shimon holds ti'ina you do for free, just like pre-kan. We had a whole section about that. We learned actually twice. So now, right in the last few dapim. So now they say, you can't say this whole thing is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It matches the rabbi's opinion. So if that part matches the rabbi's opinion, we assume the whole thing is the rabbi's opinion, in which case we could go back to proving tza'ar ba'alei chayim is only rabbinic according to the rabbis, because this matches the rabbis. To which the Gemara says, what you just said might work if Rabbi Yossi Aglili was the one who disagreed with the rabbis on that point, but it wasn't Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it was Rabbi Shimon who disagreed with the rabbis. So you can go back to saying, which was the way we rejected this source, Lo alam Rabbi Yossi Aglili ubetina savarlake Rabbanan. In other words, Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees with the rabbis about this whole thing about the masoy being too heavy, and then you don't have to help because Rabbi Yossi Aglili thinks tza'ar ba'alei chayim is rabbinic. But on the issue of whether or not you get paid, you can demand payment for helping load an animal, you could say Rabbi Yossi Aglili just agrees with the rabbis. It doesn't mean because it says that this is the rabbi's opinion. This is Rabbi Yossi. In other words, that the whole Breita is the rabbis. The whole Breita could be Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It's just that Rabbi Yossi Aglili agrees with the rabbis on that point that ti'ina is you have to pay for. And then, again, we can reject this source as trying to prove tza'ar ba'alei chayim is rabbinic, because while the source does say tza'ar ba'alei chayim is rabbinic, we can say that this whole source is attributed to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which doesn't tell us what we're really looking for, which is what's the majority opinion about this topic, and we don't know. Okay, so we're left with an open question. And now we're going to deal with one last topic about this, and then we're going to go to the next Mishna. The pasuk started with ki tir'eh chamor achicha. So when you see chamor sonecha, when you see the chamor of your enemy. So focusing on the words ki tir'eh, yachol afilu me'rachok. Now, depending on how good your vision is, but people can see things far away. So if you see far out in the distance, some animal struggling, do you have to go all the way over there? In other words, when do you become obligated? At what distance between you and the animal obligates you in this mitzvah? Talmud lomar ki tifga. Okay, now they quote a pasuk that actually doesn't have to do with this, but it's ki tifga shor oivecha o chamoro to'eh. You see an animal wandering, hashev teshivein lo, you have to return it to your neighbor. So now they say, okay, this by the way is the pasuk before. They say, it says ki tifga. That means when you bump into, that means really close, not ki tireh. So they say, okay, well, if ki tifga, so already that means it's not from far away. But if you say ki tifga, yachol p'gia mamash, sounds like you have to be right up against it. Well, Talmud lomer ki tireh. So now we're going to say it's a balance between ki tireh and ki tifga. Where's that balance going to meet? We're going to get an exact measurement. Ezo hi re'iyah sheyesh ba p'gia. What is where do you have a case where you can see, but also it's as if you've bumped into them? Shiaru chachamim echad misheva v'mechza b'mil. 1 out of 7.5 of a meal. Okay, that's the fraction. You could say it easier, 2/15 of a mile. Now, a mile takes about 18 minutes. A meal like there is very close to a mile of ours. And zehu ris. This is an amount called a ris. So it takes about 2 and a bit minutes of walking, because you assume a meal is 18 minutes, 2 out of 15 of that, 2/15 of that is about 2.5 minutes. And do the exact calculation, but somewhere around there. And Tana, there's a Breita that says, last halacha for this issue, umidadeh imo ad prasa. You have to walk with the animal after you help do the prika. You have to walk with it. And in case it falls again under its burden, up to a parsa of walking. Amar Rabbi Barachana v'notel sachar. Rabbi Barachana says, on that part, though, you can get paid for. Okay? The psak halacha is, what if, let's say it's my animal and I don't want to pay you for walking me to make sure that it doesn't fall off the animal again. So then you're exempt if I don't want you to. But if I want you to, and you have to offer basically, and if I say yes, then I actually have to pay you. Okay, that part you get paid for, not for the pre-ka, but yes, for the extra, as you say, the extra mile, right? The extra, no pun intended, but the extra mile of walking. So you get paid for that. New Mishna. From here, we're going to get into very interesting topics about what should one be learning, okay? What should one spend their time learning? And it's kind of the promo daf for learning Gemara. Okay, although we'll see, maybe yes, maybe no. Avedato v'avedat aviv avedato kodemet. You find a lost item on the ground. In this case, we know who it is. Okay, you find something that you lost, and you find something that your father lost, and you won't be able to take them both. Let's say it's an animal, and you can't take both animals back. Okay, or you won't be able to do them both right now. So you'll have to do one and then do the other. Which one do you do first? Okay, this is classic. We have a lot of Mishnah or Gemaras that discuss what we call din kedimut. Okay, order of events. What are you supposed to do first? What's more important? So prioritizing. Avedato kodemet, you do your own first. Avedato v'avedat rabo shelo kodem. If it's you or your rabbis, you also do your own first. But avedat aviv avedat rabo. What if your fathers and your rabbis? Shel rabo kodemet. You do your rabbis first before your fathers. Why is this? Sha'aviv hevi'o la'olam hazeh. Your father brought you into this world. You can see where this is going. V'rabo shelimdo chokhmah. I want to go back to these words later, so pay attention to them. A rabbi who taught you chokhmah, we'll have to see how we define this, mivi'o l'chayei ha'olam haba, brings you to the world to come. That's more important than this world, and therefore your rabbi gets precedence. Im aviv chacham shel aviv kodemet. But if your father is your teacher, then your father goes first. Even though it says chacham, but it seems to be if your father is the one who's your teacher and is a wise person, then your father comes first. Haya aviv, now we're going to have the same halacha, but with pre-kantina. Haya aviv v'rabbono simasui, maniachet shel rabbo, v'achar kach maniachet shel aviv. If they were carrying a burden and it was heavy, or their animal was, and again, your father and your rabbi, you leave your rabbis and you first you help the rabbi, then you help your father. Now notice here, the sentence of if your father taught you chokhmah, if your father was a chacham, you have to help your father first, doesn't say that here, and it is going to say it in the third section. So it's a bit of a question why it's missing here. I assume it's not missing for any major reason. Okay, probably means the same, would probably still be the law. Haya aviv v'rabo bebeit hashevi. Okay, here, fortunately, we get to a very realistic situation right now, which is, let's say your father and your rabbi were both taken captive. And as we know, right, we're dealing with hostage deals right now. You can't always get them all out, and you have to decide who you're getting out first, right? Fortunately, in this situation, we're not able to determine who gets out first. But if you had a way to basically say, I'm going to pay for this person and not that person, right? You can imagine what a struggle it would be to figure out who to do first. So the halacha tells you to make it simpler. There's a rule. Podet rabo v'achar kach podet aviv. Your rabbi goes before your father. Imagine having to make such a decision. V'im aviv chacham, but again, reminds you, if your father is a chacham, podet aviv v'achar kach podet rabo, then your father goes first. So we have the same halacha for three different situations. Aveda, lost item, the helping the animal that's struggling with its burden, and redeeming captives. Now the Gemara says, so now we want to go back to the first halacha. Why do you go first? And this we quoted the other day, although, if you remember when we quoted this, I said there was a bit of a problem, and today we're going to quote the source more at length, and we're going to see some response to what I raised as a problem the other day. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Amar Kcha, Efes kilo yeh b'chayav yom, shalcha kodem l'shal kol adam. This is taking a pasuk out of context. We're going to do this another time today as well. This pasuk basically said God is promising that there won't be poor people among us. Okay, obviously a promise that, right, hard to understand because there's always poor people, but it's basically there's, some promise that God will try to ensure that there aren't poor people. But they darshan this to say, you have to be involved in trying to ensure there aren't poor people. And in what way do you do that? Well, you take care of yourself first. Because if you don't take care of yourself and you start taking care of other people, right? This is classic. They'll tell you, I don't know, it's classic, aleph bet in learning how to deal with yourself. You have to take care of yourself and then you can help other people, right? Always the best example is on the airplane, right? Put your oxygen mask on first and then you can help other people. You won't be able to help other people if you don't help yourself first. So that's why you go first. But now we said, what's the problem is, aim of ourself, where are you going to draw the line? It's very tricky. What, you're going to always deal with yourself then? You can always say, I need more for myself. I need this for myself. I need to take care of myself and then not make time for other people. So the same person who was quoted as saying this also says the opposite, which is, so it makes it very confusing, but Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, But anyone who really takes this literally and does this according to the letter of the law, sof bali deka, will ultimately become poor themselves. In other words, if you only care about yourself, this is like, right, if I'm not for myself, right, then who will be for me? But imanila atzmi asma'ani, right? But who am I if I'm only for myself? And that's really what he's trying to say. And the question is, how do you resolve this? Because it's tricky, right? On the other hand, that's right. You have to find the balance. And Rashi says, how do we understand this? If you look at Rashi, it's toward the top of the page, mamash at the top of the page, even though we're sort of already in the middle. Even though the pasuk doesn't tell you have to do this, and again, he brings in this lifnim mishurat hadin. You have to go beyond the letter of the law. Don't be so particular and say, oh, always me first. He adds these words, as long as it's not a huge loss. In other words, if you've really got no money and you won't be able to eat, then obviously take care of yourself first. But you have to weigh that and figure out. Right? If you're always going to say, I need to deal with myself, you'll never do gmilah chesed, you never do tzedakah, and your punishment will be that you'll end up having to need charity. So it's a very important line, right, to figure out how to strike that proper balance. We all struggle with to a certain extent, whether it's giving charity, whether it's giving our time, whether it's giving, right? We always struggle with how do we balance our time? How much do we give for ourselves and how much do we give for others? So it's a very good line. And it kind of filled in from the last time we saw this, where we said, something's missing here. Now they quote the full statement that Rabbi Yehuda made. And it's interesting. He also made these statements probably at different times because it's not quoted as one long statement, but they are strung together here in the Gemara. So now we have to understand what makes somebody your Rav. A good question. Tanu Rabbanit. And we're going to have, a range here. Okay, this means now we're living in the Tannaitic time period here. We're in a Braita. So the Gemara didn't exist in the form that we know it, but the Gemara did exist. How did it exist? In orally. People knew all the arguments and the theories and now they didn't know what Abai and Rava said because we're living before Abai and Rava, but we can imagine that discussions of that sort went on. Meaning, what's the meaning of this Mishna? Where do we apply this Mishna? In what cases? Where did it come from? All that. So they're basically saying Mishna and Torah or Tanakh are not that important, right? When we talk about a Rav, we're talking about a Rav who teaches you Chokhmah, which is understanding the Mishnah and the Torah and going in depth. And really what we call today Gemara, that's what they're talking about. That's the rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Sharov Chokhmato Imenu. If you're a Tanakh person, and mostly what you learned was Tanakh, so your rabbi, who taught you most of the Tanakh, he's your rabbi. Okay? Or Mishnah, same thing. Doesn't have to be Gemara. It's just someone who taught you most of what you know. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Afilu lo yir nav ela b'mishnah achad zeu rabo. Fascinating line. Someone can be considered your Rav to the extent that they're going to come before your father if they taught you one Mishnah. And in fact, we're going to see some examples. I'm a Rava. Kigon Rav Schora de Asbaran Zuama Listeron. He explained to me a term that came up in the Mishnah in Kalim. What is this term, azua malistron? And he, for me, is a rabbi because he explained to me that one term. By the way, what is azua malistron? There's two different opinions. It's like a spoon they use for skimming the bad stuff off the soup pot. You have all that froth at the top. But people also say, if you know what this is, a spork. You ever go to a camping? You have camping gear at home. It's a fork and a spoon together. So some people explain that's what this is. One side's a spoon, one side's a fork. That it's like a unique type of spoon. Okay. Anyway, he taught me what that term means, and that makes him my rabbi. Shmuel karamane ale hahume rabbanan. He tore kriya. People tear kriya for their rabbi. So he tore kriya for this rabbi, de Esbere, who explained to him the following Mishnah in Talmud. We have a while to get there, but we will get there in the Daf Yomi. Echad yorei lamat hashechli v'achad poteach kevan. This is the way the Kohen who would come in the morning to do the Truman Adeshin, we would take the ashes off the altar in the morning, the first avodah. He would go into the temple. How would he open the door? It was a tricky door. The first door to get into the temple had a lock from the inside. So he had to put his arm in up to his armpit, turn his hand around, and then open from inside the first lock. And then the second lock, there were these two keys. Once he was able to open that first door, then the second door he would open in a normal fashion. And this, as you can understand, is a little complicated to explain, especially if you don't have pictures. Okay, when we learn it, hopefully we'll be able to find some pictures of it and understand it a little bit better. But because of that, he was called my rabbi. And I would tear kriya for him. Amar Ula, Talmidei Chachamim shebeBavel. In Babylonia, there were a lot of Talmidei Chachamim who were friends with each other. They were colleagues. And because they were each so smart and respected each other, Omdim ze mipnei ze, they would stand up one for the other. Korim zal ze, they would tear kriya, even though they weren't different, right, generations, where usually the Rav was the generation before. But here, friends that they would learn with, they would treat as if they were their rabbi. But when it came to choosing your rabbi over your father, they wouldn't choose these people as their rabbi. Their father would come first. Only if it was their rabbi, they really learned most of their Torah from. Here we get a pretty sad story. Rav Chisda was the student of Rav Huna, and he asked Rav Huna the following question. He says, what if the student is such a student that the teacher needs the student? That the student has very sharp questions, sharpens the teacher, and teaches the teacher, right? In fact, Rabbi Yochanan quotes it here, where the famous line about I learn more from my students, right? The students help sharpen the teacher. So what if you have a student like that? Now, in the style of Haman and Achashverosh, right, where Achashverosh asks Haman, how should I honor a person I really want to honor? And Haman thinks, oh, who would it be if not me? So Rav Huna thinks that Rav Chisda is saying, like me to you. You need me as your student because I sharpen you. What would it be if I had your Aveda, if you had my Aveda, your student, Rav Chisda, and your father's, would you choose me? That's what he thought he was asking. Now, if the teacher thinks the student's asking this question, the teacher thinks, wow, this is really not so respectful. You're basically saying that I'm like your student. Me to you, student to teach, teacher to student is really like student to teacher. Is that what you're trying to say? So Amar hey, Chisda, lo tzrich nalach. I don't need you, Chisda, okay? He doesn't call him Rav, you see. Atzrichatli, okay, you could read this in a bunch of different ways. Either atzrichatli, period. Okay, this is a good example of where you could put the period in different places. It would mean different things, although it doesn't really make such a difference in terms of the content, right? I don't need you, you need me. Or atzrichatli ad arba'im shnin. You need me for 40 years, meaning you have to learn with me either until you're 40, you have to learn with me for 40 years until you can call yourself something more than that, okay? Or just you need me, and then ad arba'im shnin is the beginning of the next sentence, which is ad arba'im shnin ikapte adade. They were angry with each other for 40 years, okay? Or just they were angry with each other. Again, it really just depends where you put the period. So now, below ayla gabe hadade. So they got angry at each other and they didn't go, right? So even though they were teacher-student for so many years, they got into this big fight over this. Yativ Rav Chisda arba'inta anita mishum dechalash date de Rav Huna. Rav Chisda then sat for a fast for 40 days because he felt terrible. He got Rav Huna upset. He didn't mean to. He really didn't mean what Rav Huna thought he meant. And Yativ Rav Huna arba'inta anita mishum dechalash de Rav Chisda. And Rav Huna sat in a fast for 40 days because he felt terrible that he accused Rav Chisda in an untrue manner of talking about himself and not just asking a fair and square legitimate question. So a bit of a sad story about, how you have to be careful what you suspect other people of doing and, be careful what you say that might cause other people to think you're asking a question. It's not really showing respect for them. Itmar, Rav Chisda bar Yosef amar Rabbi Yochanan halakha ke Rabbi Yehuda. Now we have to go back. We have these three opinions about the rabbi. We now choose the middle opinion. Doesn't matter what he teaches you. If you learn most of your stuff from him, that's your rabbi. Rav Acha bar Rav Huna amar Rav Sheshet halakha ke Rabbi Yossi. The last opinion, you even just learn one thing. That's your rabbi. That comes before your father. We don't have a problem with Rabbi Yochanan's psak. Rabbi Yochanan hachi that we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Hamar Rabbi Yochanan halacha kistam Mishna. We always ask these questions of Rabbi Yochanan. If a psak of his contradicts a stam Mishna, we have a problem because Rabbi Yochanan in general holds that we hold like a regular again. Stam Mishna is a Mishnah without a machloket in it. And what's the stam Mishnah? Well, I pointed this out when we learned the Mishnah. Utznan rabo shalimdo chokhmah. So what is my chokhmah? Rov chokhmato. The Mishnah says Rabo Shalom Do Chokhmah. It sounds like any Chokhmah, which sounds like Rabbi Yehuda, Aviv Shalom Do Chokhmah, to which they say, right? So it's, sorry. And that was already the answer. Tanan Rabo Shalom Do Chokhmah, and they assume Chokhmah matches, okay, look at the language. Rabbo Shalom do chokhmah. Rabbi Meir was the one who said, right? Rabbo Shalom do chokhmah. He says, Rabbo Shalom do chokhmah, below Rabbo Shalom do mikal Mishna. Sounds like our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, right? Sounds very clear. So how could Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? To which they answer, my chokhmah rov chokhmato. What does it mean chokhmah? It means the majority of your chokhmah, and it doesn't necessarily mean Gemara. In other words, that could be translated in two different ways, so it's not really a problem. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to learn about what's better to learn, okay? Which we already kind of saw Rabbi Meir at least, but let's see. If you learn Tanakh, it's good, it's not great. Okay, what's the problem? So Rashi points out, Rashi gives a historical reason, and which might not be relevant anymore nowadays, or really wouldn't be relevant, because he said the Torah is written down, but the Mishna and the Gemara are not written down, and therefore they're going to be forgotten. It wasn't written. And you weren't even allowed to write it. He starts to explain why they ended up starting to write it down, but in those days they didn't write it down. So all the more so you have to learn it, because if we don't learn it, it's going to be forgotten. Wouldn't be relevant nowadays. At least according to Rashi's explanation of why that is. Perhaps one could give other explanations. Part of the problem some of the other commentaries talk about is that you don't really know how to keep halacha from the Torah. It's not like a halachic book, and we want to know halacha because that's how we know how to act. Right nowadays, you could say it's the opposite, right? You learn Gemara, it doesn't really help you. It's super confusing how to paskin and what to do, right? You need to learn Shulchan Aruch or Mishnah Brura or, whatever it might be. So, or those books that are written now by people that give you the, how to. So it's interesting how this might change. B'Mishnah, midav v'notzlim ala asachar. You learn Mishnah, though, that's good, and you get rewarded for it. But Talmud, but the best and the most important thing is to learn the Talmud, because again, the Mishnah gives you different opinions, but you don't really understand why, how. You have to really understand where it comes from, what would be, how this would be relevant today, how you would apply it to other cases, because the Mishnah is often casuistic. So that's okay. If we ended here, that would be fine. But last line of this Breita says, but you should always go to Mishnah rather than Talmud. Okay, that makes no sense. We just said Talmud is the most important thing. Hagufakasha, that makes no sense. It contradicts itself. I'm right, but Talmud ain't l'chamidag dolam izel. So how could you say Talmud is the most important thing, and therefore you should run to learn Mishnah? Total contradiction. Amar Rabbi Yochanan turning out Amabek. Bimei Rebbe Nishnei Mishnazo. This was said in the time of Rebbe. Shavku kolayama matnitim ba'azlu batar Talmuda. In the time of Rebbe, everybody left the Mishnah and started only learning Talmud, going in depth. Hadr Darishlu, he said, you know what? We can't forget the Mishnah either. Ulalam haberatz the Mishnah yoter min Talmud. That we really have to learn Mishnah. It was, again, this is like PR. First they did PR for Gemara, and then they say, oh, too many people were learning that and ignored the Mishnah. So, okay, we got to do the PR in the other direction to balance it. So I want to read this Rashi with you. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it's a super fascinating Rashi. I wanted to point out, this is Rashi's historical version of how things happen. Doesn't mean it's the only way, but it's Rashi's view of history. So let's just read this Rashi. Bimei Rebbe Nishnei Mishnazo. And with that, he explains the Gemara here. The fact that we said Talmud is the most important, okay, when we started to have a lot of students of Shammai and Hillel, there were 3 generations before Rebbe. Right? What happened? There started to be a lot of debates, and there became 2 different Torahs. There was the Shammai Torah, the Hillel Torah, and things got very confusing. Why was this? He gives a historical explanation. Right? It definitely wasn't the best time. It was the Romans, and that was when the temple got destroyed after that. And Rebbe was known to be in the likes of the head of the Romans, Antoninus, the Caesar. So basically what he's saying is, when things were bad politically for the Jews, it was very hard to sit and learn and spend the time. Once things got better and God helped us to basically have Rebbe become favored in the eyes of Antoninus, Kid Amrina Avodah Zarah, as it says in Avodah Zarah, right? He doesn't quote a historical book, he quotes the Gemara. ונחו מצרה, ושלח וקיבץ את כל תלמידי ארץ ישראל, ועד ימיו לא היו מסכתות סדורות. So basically what he do, he got all the rabbis together, and the mesechtot were not organized before that. אלא כל תלמיד ששמע דבר מפי גדול ממנו גרסה. Okay, every talmid who heard something from someone would just say it. It wasn't organized at all. By the way, the modern academics say no, it was somewhat organized. It was just organized orally. Okay. V'natan simanim, and then he gave, simanim for everything, to remember things. Halacha ploni to ploni, shamati mipi ploni, and who we learned things from. Ukshintkaptsu achar kach kol echad ma sheshama, natnu lev levarer tamei machlokot. And once they got together and said, this one said that one said that, then they also went in depth to understand better. Divrei mi ru'uyim l'kayem, who should we go according to? Okay, each topic when in and of itself. And then also Stamnami by Mishna, Rebbe just wrote some things without different opinions, right? Just this is the way you do it. Shava'ah Rebbe yet for him, because he held by, right? He saw theirs seemed to be better and therefore put those in. Ushna stam kedei likbo alachat motam, so people know the halach is that way. Therefore, they said, Talmud en l'chamidag dolamizo she'itnu lev l'tam na Mishnah. You have to really understand the meaning of the Mishnah. But then what happened? Everyone was only just doing the thinking. Okay, but then, right, he said you have to do Ratz Mishnah. I'm skipping down to the few Rashis after that. Have a Ratz Mishnah, lafi sheyirei pen yishtakhu mishnayot v'yachlifu shemor chachamim b'mkom chiyuv yom patur. As if you don't learn the Mishnayot, this is like the exact, should you learn in depth or should you learn breadth, and should you learn Mishnah or should you learn more in-depth Gemara? Right? It's much more interesting to learn in depth. On the other hand, you need the breadth of learning the Mishnah. So there's a balance here. Okay. Now he says, my drosh, back to the Gemara. Kididarish Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli. My dichtiv hagei la'amei pish'am la'ami pish'am u'lebeit Yaakov chatotam. That is a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Hagei la'ami pish'am, tell the nation their sins. Right? These are Talmidei Chachamim. Now pish'am is worse than chatatam. Pish'am is when you do something intentionally. Sheshgagot na'aso lahem kizdonot. Ami is my nation, which is the Talmidei Chachamim. They are going to sin worse. Why? Because their mistakes are actually like intentional. Why? Because if they learn and they don't learn well enough, they make mistakes and it's their fault for not learning well enough. So anything they do accidental actually is really somewhat intentional. But lebeit Yaakov chatatam, who's Beit Yaakov? Notice they're not called my nation because they're liyamei haaretz. We're going to see. Elo amei haaretz. These are people who don't learn, which usually are considered worse off. Well, their things they do intentionally wrong are actually viewed by God as accidents. Why is that? Because they don't know any better. So God views anything intentional, they just never learned. So because they never learned, like we call it a tinok shenishba, right? So they just didn't really know. Hainu titnam Rabbi Yehuda Omer, heve zahir b'Talmud shekeshigagat Talmud olezadon. And this is the Mishnah that says, here we're going to quote a Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda says, be careful with your learning because any mistake could become intentional. And some people say we're talking about that you're actually going to cause others to sin because you're going to teach things wrong, and that's also really bad. So either because, right, the rabbinic chayim, for example, says this is like when we say how God treats, right, he has higher expectations for those who are closer to him. So the more you learn, you actually have to be much more careful. And that's why you should learn Talmud, because you really have to learn and understand properly. Without that, you won't. Darash Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli, last thing before we finish this chapter. My dichtiv shim'u dvar Hashem acharedim al dvaro. I'm going to read you this pasuk. I'm going to explain it according to the simple reading, and then we're going to see the drasha is totally not the simple reading and a really important message for us nowadays. So shim'u dvar Hashem, it's a pasuk in Yeshayahu Samach Vav, hacharedim el dvaro. This is where charedim get their name from, who are so, they're very close to God, they have big fear of God, and they listen to everything God says. So you who are charedim el dvaro, you say, Amru achechem sonechem menadechem leman shmiach bar Hashem. Now, your brothers, you're the ones who hate you and the ones who try to excommunicate you or distance themselves from you, say that it's all on our account. These sound like the bad guys, so to speak, right? Not the ones that are charedim. There's this split between the charedim and everybody else. They say that God does this God is doing this for us, not for you. And v'nir ebesimchatchem v'hem yevoshet. But in the end, you're going to see in the simcha, when the Mashiach comes, you're going to bask in the glory of that, and they will be humiliated. They will have their day. That's what it sounds like it's saying. However, look at how Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli darshans this. Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli, by the way, is the Rabbi Yehuda that we always see in the Mishnah. So my daktiv shem udvar shem charidim al. So who are charidim? Elu talmidei chachamim. These are people who learn Torah. Amru achechem. Interesting. These are not bad people. These are ba'alei mikra, the people who learn Tanakh. Right now, it's not that they're bad; they learn Tanakh. Sonechem elu ba'alei Mishna. Okay, they hate you. Some people say they hate you because you say Rashi says sonim ba'alei Talmud lefish ba'alei Talmud omrim ba'alei Mishna she'em b'alei olam. The Talmud people say, oh, you Mishnah people, you're wasting away your life. So they hate them because they always attack them. You see all the, right? You can visualize, unfortunately, in our society, all the inner fighting. Oh, you don't have it right. You don't have it right. You don't have it right. Wait till you see where he goes with this. Minadechem elo amei haaretz, right? That sounds like nidoy, excommunicating, right? Those are the worst. They're the amei haaretz. Shema tomal, you might think to say, Pasak sivramu batel sikuyam. These guys have no hope, right? Talmud lamar v'nir'eh b'simchatchem. Nir'eh, we will all see b'simchatchem. When the Mashiach comes, everybody will be there. Shema tomar Yisrael yevoshu. You might think it's talking about the Jews, all those other categories of people. No. Talmud lamar v'hem yevoshu. Who's hem? The other. That's ovdei kochavim yevoshu v'Yisrael yismachu. In other words, when the Mashiach comes, all the Jews are going to enjoy, whether they learned only Torah, whether they learned only Mishna, whether they didn't learn at all. Doesn't matter. We're all together. This is an amazing pasuk and a translation, a really flip entirely of the pasuk to show the importance of achdut, of being together. So it's a very good message for us, particularly in these complicated days. And with that, Hadran alach elu mitziot, I actually think that we're ending elu mitziot with this idea about, first of all, the importance of learning, because elu mitziot comes up all the time. I actually was thinking this is a good example. On Facebook, I saw that on Shabbat, somebody found in Ranana a big sum of money in front of Yad Rabbanim, and they put it up on Facebook saying, I found on Shabbat a big bunch of money. So first of all, you're talking about someone who wasn't wasn't keeping Shabbat. They found money and picked it up on Shabbat. And you see that they were but they knew to announce it, right? They put it up on Facebook. And the idea here that these are mitzvot that are universal. These are mitzvot, and that's what we talked about, right? They're mitzvot that apply to everybody. Everybody gets involved in these, not only people who keep all the mitzvot or keep the majority of the mitzvot. And this is a universal idea, and that's why maybe they're ending with the fact that these laws are important. They're important for everyone to know. And number one, the importance of knowing the mitzvot, because you can make a lot of mistakes in these mitzvot. You could, right? It's the whole thing is there's a fine line between when I can pick it up, when I can't touch it, when I have to pick it up, when I can pick it up for myself, when I have to pick it up and announce it. And if you don't learn and you don't really understand, it's very hard to know what the law is. So even though we have, by instinct, what we think would be, I wondered, how do you find the money? Did he really need to return it? Did he not? Anyway, that's some thoughts to end this chapter with. Now we're going to start the next chapter, which is Hamafki. This is all going to be about Shomrim. We're not going to give the intro today because we're going to get to the intro more when the Gemara gets to it. But right now, we're just going to start with the case, and we've talked about this anyway before, a shomer chinam. Someone's watching something for free. So the Mishna says, an animal or vessels. First question of the Gemara is going to be, why do you have to mention both? What's the reason? If you remember, shomer chinam is not liable for theft as long as they take an oath. They have to take an oath, it was stolen from me or it was lost from me, and then they're exempt. So this Mishnah is going to tell us a variation on this. If nignivu or shavdu, so it was stolen. Theoretically, all they have to do is take an oath and they're exempt. But shilem v'lo ratzah l'shavah, we talked about this. If they want to pay and they don't want to take the oath, sharei amru shomer chinam nishba v'yotzei, theoretically, they could get out of it. But this person didn't want to. Nimtza ganav, if later they find the thief, you remember this? Mishalem tashlumei kefel, he pays the kefel, right, when you find the real thief. Tavachu machar mishalem arba v'chamisha, they slaughtered and sold the animal. Let's say it was an animal, they would have to pay the 4 or 5 payment. Lemi mishalem, who did they pay to? Lemi shapikadon etzlo, to the shomer chinam, because the shomer chinam, in paying when they weren't really liable to pay, acquired the rights to the kefel, if there is kefel in the future. We'll talk about this soon in the Gemara. Nishba v'lo ratzah l'shalem, but if they took the oath and didn't pay, exempted themselves from payment, if the same thing happens, when they pay the double or the 4 or 5 payment, they pay to the original owner. okay? Because there's no reason to pay to the Baal Pikadon. He exempted himself, removed himself from the situation, and then it's just between the thief and the owner. So why did it need both? And then within this tzriche, we're going to learn what the logic here is, how this works. Well, if you just had an animal, you might say the following. Now, what they're going back to the original deal. When you asked me to watch your animal, you basically gave me rights right then because I was dealing. Now, an animal is hard to watch. You have to bring it in, bring it out. You got to air it out. You got to feed it. You got to do all sorts of things. So when you gave me that animal, you basically said to me the following. You didn't say it, but it was like implicit. I'm doing you a big favor because I'm doing this for free and I'm going to have to work hard. So you're basically telling me, listen, if it gets stolen and if you decide that you're going to pay for it instead of swearing and exempting yourself, I'm basically giving you the rights to the kefel, to the double payment. That's basically, it was like an implicit deal between us. That might be true only for an animal because I work hard for it. But aval kelim, to lo nafesh chayim, it's not very hard to deal with kelim. Maybe you didn't give me the rights to the kefel. And itana kelim, what if we just had the case of the vessels? Now we're going to have the opposite logic. Why specifically in vessels, it would be more likely that you gave me rights to the kefel. Because you would have thought maybe there you gave me rights to the kefel, because the maximum you'll lose out on is a double payment. But an animal, if the person who steals it not only steals it, but also slaughters it and sells it, or slaughters or sells, you will get a 4 times or 5 times payment. So you have this one animal that you theoretically could get 5 times the amount. So maybe you're not willing to give me the kefel and the arba avachamisha because your chance, right? That's a big amount that you're giving me. Now, of course, all this is just potentially. You're giving me an item to watch. Nobody really thinks it's going to get stolen. But the assumption is that from the beginning, you're saying, if I decide to pay for it, then you're willing to give me rights. And now in the end, the Mishna is telling you both for behemah, both for kelim, you'd have to say both because otherwise it wouldn't have been obvious. You wouldn't have been able to learn one from the other. Last thing we're going to end with is a question. How could you possibly say that in the beginning of this deal, when you asked me to watch your item, you're giving me rights to, in the event of theft, and in the event that I decide to pay for it, you're willing to give me rights to the kefel and the arba v'chamisha? But that is so not in this world yet. And you can't pass something to someone. You can't give someone rights to something that doesn't exist. This item is right here, right now. It hasn't been stolen. We haven't found the thief yet. All sorts of things have to happen for there even to be an actuality of this. Even if it's stolen, you might not find the thief. You might not have money to pay. All sorts of things. And even the Rabbi Meir, we might remember this. Rabbi Meir has an opinion that you can do this, but not in this kind of case. That's like fruits on a palm tree that are going to come, right? It's a likely circumstance, whereas this is very unlikely that this will all happen, and we'll continue the question tomorrow, okay? So, and then we'll get to an answer. So what did we do today? We finished up the attempted proofs that tza'ar ba'alei chayim is only rabbinic. We couldn't prove it. We talked about the distance, how far away you have to be to do prika. Then we moved into order of precedence. Yourself, then your rabbi, then your father, unless your father is also your rabbi. What does a rabbi mean? What are you supposed to be learning? We got off on very interesting tangents. And then we got to this unique case where basically the shomer decides to pay when they're really exempt. And with that, they can acquire the rights to the kefel and the arba v'chamisha payment. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and besorot tovot in light of all the things we learned today.